to that I am a Christian, and I also struggled between literature and wanting to serve in the church, be a missionary, but in the end I decided that literature is my preference. But I will attempt to connect my faith with literature now. So I'm going to speak about the undiscovered country, referring to Hamlet's To Be or Not to Be soliloquy. And unfortunately I wasn't able to print out the last part, so right before the end I'm going to switch over and read from the laptop. In Act 3, Scene 1, Hamlet declares in his well-known To Be or Not to Be soliloquy that it is the dread of something after death, the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, that makes us rather bear those ills we have than to fly to others we know not of. He goes on to equate his fear of the afterlife with conscience and blames it for obstructing enterprises of great pitch and moment. The writer of Ecclesiastes in the Bible expresses similar sentiments when he muses, I know that whatever God does will be forever. To this there is nothing to add. From this there is nothing to subtract. And the way God acts inspires dread. What is has been already. What will be is already. Ecclesiastes 3:14. He even goes so far as to conclude that human is in no way better off than animal, since all is futile. Ecclesiastes 3:19. Both Hamlet and the writer of Ecclesiastes are struggling with very existential questions. Is it better to refrain out of fear of the unknown, or to act boldly and blindly? Can anything we do or don't do have any meaning? Does it matter in the end whether we say yes or no, look this way or that way, breathe or not? In his seminal existential work, Fear and Trembling, Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard wrote, it takes a purely human courage to renounce the whole of temporality in order to win eternity. But I do indeed win it, and cannot in all eternity renounce that, for that would be a self-contradiction. But it takes a paradoxical and humble courage, then, to grasp the whole of temporality on the strength of the absurd, and that courage is the courage of faith. Is faith indeed the bridge between temporality and eternity, between thought and action? Does it span the chasm that both Hamlet and the writer of Ecclesiastes stood on the edge of? Hamlet appears to be weighing the value of three choices, namely to continue to live passively enduring evil, to commit suicide, to fly to other ills we know not of. Sorry, I'm a little nervous. Yeah. Okay. Or to rise up and resist evil by any means possible, ignorant of the consequences in this life or the next. Which path will prove more advantageous in the service of truth and justice? If Hamlet knows the truth, does he not have a responsibility to act in its favor? Yet what if his only perceived means of action stands in direct contradiction to his knowledge of truth? Truth is at once that passionate drive to right what is wrong, and at the same time the deep conviction that anything he does will only exacerbate the wrong. Hamlet is trapped, or so it would seem, a sensation indeed familiar to every human before or since his time. One option remains close to him, to do nothing. For he realizes that even by doing nothing, he is doing something, the torturous consequences of which are unavoidable. In the words of Kohelet, the writer of Ecclesiastes, so rather than the living who still have lives to live, I congratulate the dead who have already met death. Happier than both of these are those who are yet unborn and have not seen the evil things that are done under the sun. Ecclesiastes 4:2-3. The only sure option is an impossibility, to erase one's existence, to have never been born. All other choices are tainted with a measure of uncertainty. There is no way to stop the momentum of time, carrying us towards some unknown destination. William Hubben wrote in his book comparing the life and work of Dostoevsky, Kierkegaard, Kafka, and Nietzsche, Kierkegaard never tired of stressing the nature of existence as becoming, fluctuating, evolving, and its logical formulation is always apt to be inauthentic, too massive and stationary. Moreover, the essence of human existence is uncertainty, the very realm in which faith, not knowledge, must live to become meaningful. End of quote. The essence of human existence is uncertainty, and this is the precondition for faith. The biblical writer of the Epistle to the Hebrews defined faith in the following terms, quote, "Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see," end quote. If we already possessed everything we desire, if we could see everything we imagine, faith would become obsolete. As the Apostle Paul wrote to the Corinthians, quote, "Then I shall know just as fully as I am myself known. As it is, these remain, faith, hope, and love, the three of them, and the greatest of them is love," end quote. As it is, Hamlet does not know, nor is he yet fully known. He is becoming, fluctuating, and evolving. Agnes Heller writes in The Time is Out of Joint, quote, "The audience to which Shakespeare's tragedies, history plays, and dramas reveal their truth is a congregation that bears testimony to an understanding of virtue, scorn, the age and body of the time, the human condition as historical condition, the historical condition as modern condition, the modern condition as life lived fully amid the constraints of transience and finitude. This is Hamlet's dilemma, and indeed that of humanity as a whole, how to live life fully amid the constraints of transience and finitude. What does it mean to live life fully? To satisfy one's needs and desires? To satisfy the needs and desires of others? To express oneself? To live in compliance with an authority? To avoid punishment? Despite Hamlet's musings regarding the relationship of fear and conscience and the intrusive nature of conscience into enterprises of great pitch and moment, he discovers that to live fully is all of these things and so much more than he can ever comprehend, at least within the passage of time. Peter Millward notes in his book, Shakespeare's Religious Background, quote, "There is an undying fascination in what lies beyond the temporal arena of this world, counterbalancing that dread of something after death, which is the burden of Hamlet's melancholy reflections. It is precisely this moment of his thought which imparts to Shakespeare's work its peculiar tone of profundity and resonance, distinguishing it from that of his contemporaries." End of quote. It is without a doubt Shakespeare's unscathing portrayal of depravity and helplessness of the human condition, coupled with his fierce refusal to utterly condemn humanity, which continues to fascinate audiences up to the present time. In this, he imitates the divine character as it is portrayed in the Bible, where wrath and punishment are always preceded and followed by expressions of extravagant love and tenderness. Peter Millward writes of Shakespeare's knowledge of the Scriptures, quote, His familiarity with the Bible is surprisingly extensive. There is hardly a book of the Old or the New Testament which is not represented at least by some chance word or phrase in one or the other of his plays. The books he seems to have known the most thoroughly, and even in places by heart, are Genesis, Job, the Psalms, and Ecclesiasticus from the Old Testament. In his use of them, he does not merely borrow an occasional phrase or allusion for the enrichment of his dramatic language, but he derives the central ideas and images that run through all his plays. Although there is no direct mention of God in Hamlet, the very recognition of the presence of evil and the zealous drive to be free of it, the striving toward a more righteous and just state of affairs, are clear indications of an instinctive awareness of a higher order and an unseen reality. As Philip Edwards writes in his article on Shakespeare in the Oxford Illustrated History of English Literature, quote, "The God of Shakespeare's tragedies is indeed a hidden God. It is the devil who is in full view all the time. Is there any cause in nature that makes these hard hearts?" asks Lear in the crazy arraignment of Goneril. The answer is no. The cause is supernatural. The supernaturally strong force of evil must be countered by an at least equally strong force of good, or there is no hope for anyone, and Hamlet may as well give up the struggle. Despite the fact that the majority of the play focuses on the destructive and infectious nature of evil and ends with Hamlet's own murder, justice yet makes its presence felt. Peter Millward points out that, quote, even those speeches which most linger in the memory with a pessimistic impression, such as the soliloquies of Hamlet and Macbeth, and certain speeches of Lear and Prospero, are not only countered by more optimistic sentiments within the play, but reflect in themselves the close familiarity of the dramatist with the books of the Old Testament. A careful collation of these speeches with parallel passages in the Psalms and the book of Job is enough to show how closely the thought of Shakespeare follows the wisdom of the Bible. From the book of Job come Hamlet's slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, Job 6:4, a consummation devoutly to be wished, Job 6:9-10, to die, to sleep, Job 14:10 and 12, the oppressor's wrong, Job 3:18, and the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveler returns, Job 7:9-10, 10:21, and 16:22, end quote. Hamlet, like Job and like Coelette, struggles with his desire to usurp divinity, to file his claims against heaven and bring evidence of his qualifications for the position. Quote, for who would bear the whips and scorns of time, the oppressor's wrong, the proud man's contumely, the pangs of despised love, the law's delay, the insolence of office, and the spurns that patient merit of the unworthy takes. End of quote. Hamlet is just such an unworthy sufferer, who, were he not confined by time and uncertainty, would put an end to the law's delay. The writer of Ecclesiastes despairingly muses, quote, what has been is already defined. We know what people are. They cannot bring justice to one who is stronger than themselves. End quote. Everything is already defined. We know what people are, mere pawns with no real playing power. Were we but gods, all would soon be set right. Carl Schmitt writes in his article, The Source of the Tragic, quote, this is the basis of the seriousness of tragic action, which being impossible to fictionalize or relativize, is also impossible to play. All participants are conscious of the ineluctable reality which no human mind has conceived, a reality externally given, imposed and unavoidable. The core of tragic action, the source of genuine tragedy, is something so irrevocable that no mortal can invent it, no genius can compose it. In tragedy, the common public sphere is based on a shared historical reality. End quote. As Hamlet so aptly noted, what human would endure such a reality without protest, much less create such a reality? It is clearly the work of an imagination beyond our own. It is the reality which leaves Hamlet, Job, Coelette, and all of us standing at the crossroads between suicide, forbearance, and rebellion. Yet, as Kierkegaard pointed out, there is a fourth option. Speaking of Abraham's dilemma following the divine call to sacrifice his son, he writes, we are now at the paradox. Either the individual as the particular can stand in an absolute relation to the absolute, and then the ethical is not the highest, or Abraham is done for. He is neither a tragic hero nor an aesthetic hero. The individual in an absolute relation to the absolute. The individual as higher than the ethical. The individual as part of an integrated whole. The individual no longer coming from without, but functioning from within. How is this possible? Without power corrupting the very core of Hamlet's being, turning him into yet another Claudius. Hamlet is only too aware of this danger. As Peter Millward comments, quote, those who are charged with the restoration of moral order are often, in fact, themselves infected with the very disease they seek to relieve. The same is true of Hamlet. In Hamlet, significant emphasis is laid on the theme of original sin in the heated declarations of the prince. First to Polonius, use every man after his desert, and who should escape whipping? And subsequently to Ophelia in the nunnery scene, we are errant knaves all, believe none of us. It is as though his knowledge of the combined guilt of his uncle and his mother has induced in Hamlet an awareness of the universal sinfulness of mankind, including himself, and in this knowledge he finds it difficult, if not impossible, to take any redemptive action." End quote. In the heat of his struggle against time and uncertainty and the defined order, Hamlet realizes that they are not the true enemy, for even were they to vanish, a more formidable enemy would still lie within, dividing his mind and heart. In his recent book, Religion Around Shakespeare, Peter Ivor Kaufman speaks of the marked emphasis on introspection, which had gained wide influence in Shakespeare's lifetime, in part as a result of Michel de Montaigne's essays, but also as a result of growing religious awareness of its tremendous value. Kaufman writes, quote, "Literary historians often overlook late Tudor devotional literature that introduces a strikingly similar discovery, a realization that interiority was terribly disorderly, brimming with contradictions, self-accusation, and self-intimidation. Missionary priests and Reformed preachers encouraged auditors and readers to lose their bearings, to find their blessings. That is, to find that God cared enough to counter complacency with confusion and with spasms of self-loathing. But auditors and readers would also learn that God was the source of their sorrows, and that their sorrows were symptoms of reconciliation, and therefore were blessings. For example, central to the Jesuits' evangelical ethos were Ignatius Loyola's spiritual exercises and other efforts at counseling that aimed to inspire self-analysis and personal disorientation. But disorientation was the first step toward reorientation." End quote. Sorrows as symptoms of reconciliation, disorientation as the first step towards reorientation. These are also elements of the paradox, once again in keeping with the biblical storyline. The prophet Isaiah wrote in his familiar prophecy about the Messiah, "He was despised, the lowest of men, a man of sorrows, familiar with suffering, one from whom, as it were, we averted our gaze, despised, for whom we had no regard." Isaiah 53:3. There can be no reconciliation without suffering. There can be no redemption, no righting of wrongs. No truth can prevail without facing the horrors of hell. Without, but most importantly, within. William Hubben, writing of Kierkegaard, says, quote, "Suffering, to which he gives paramount importance, is the element in which that which is religious begins to breathe. Suffering is therefore the beginning. Part of this suffering is man's consciousness of guilt, which cries out for reconciliation with God." End quote. In the end, it is not the condemnation of God, or even the condemnation of Claudius, which Hamlet so passionately desires, as much as peace within himself. To be able to stand in an absolute relationship with the absolute. Peter Ivor Kaufman notes, quote, "In every age on stage, Shakespeare's Danish prince is a relic of the cultural practice favored by both the forward Jacobite Calvinists and the expatriate Catholic pietists, all of whom came close to consecrating inconstancy and to equating the true feeling of religion with an intensely inward and disorienting search for consolations among Jesuits and for assurances of election among Puritans." Okay, almost finished. This is the last page. Conscience, as it turns out, is not ultimately the fear of unknown and terrible retribution for committing enterprises of great pitch and moment, but rather a hunger for eternal peace, the only valid place of conception for true enterprises of great pitch and moment. Agnes Heller eloquently summarizes the crucial difference between Hamlet and Claudius. Quote, "To be able to select among information, to determine not to believe anyone, but believe someone absolutely. These are also questions of truth. To abstract one's decisions from momentary interest, real or seeming, this is also a question of truth. These and similar questions are presented in Shakespeare, and all of them are decisive in all of his dramas. Hamlet and Claudius are each other's absolute opposites, for Hamlet wants the truth and nothing but the truth, and Claudius wants the untruth, and nothing but the untruth." End quote. Hamlet does finally carry out his enterprise of great pitch and moment, yet it is in a spirit of humble submission to a higher will than his own. The rebellious prosecutor of the to be or not to be soliloquy has given way to a man who is fully aware of the fact that he himself is not capable of re-establishing truth and justice. He is neither its source nor its dispenser. The closest he comes to defining his newfound faith are the following words uttered in response to Horatio's suggestion that he postpone his duel with Laertes. Quote, "Not a whit. We defy augury. There is special providence in the fall of a sparrow. If it be now, 'tis not to come. If it be not to come, it will be now. If it be not now, yet it will come. The readiness is all. Since no man of aught he leaves knows, what is it to leave betimes? Let be." End quote. We defy augury, that frail human attempt to manipulate and bend to our purposes that which is incomprehensible to us. Hamlet has been freed from this crutch. Instead, he entrusts himself completely to the special providence in the fall of the sparrow. In the words of Walter Benjamin, quote, "His, Hamlet's life, the exemplary object of his mourning, points before its extinction to the Christian providence in whose bosom his mournful images are transformed into a blessed existence. Only in a princely life such as this is melancholy redeemed by being confronted with itself. The rest is silence. For everything that has not been lived sinks beyond recall in this space where the word of wisdom leads but a deceptive, ghostly existence. Only Shakespeare was capable of striking Christian sparks from the Baroque rigidity of the melancholic. It is only in this prince that melancholy self-absorption attains to Christianity." End quote. Human life inescapably begins in this space where wisdom leads but a deceptive, ghostly